Glad to have you back on the segment, and if you're just joining us, you're right on time because the show is just about to begin. And today we're going to be discussing something really recent that has affected the whole economy. It has been on the lips of everybody. And before I introduce our guest to you today, I would like to read something before we get to meet our guest. Here I have, over the years, women have clamored for a fair share of representation in leadership positions in the country. Though the positions occupied by the men outnumber that of the women, it is quite encouraging that the voices of women are being heard. The National Gender Policy has formulated a 35% affirmative action in Nigeria since 2006. This policy demands that 35% of women be involved in all governance process. The NGP is recognized, but it is not practiced as the structures and processes to use are not in place. President Bola Tinubu recently sent his list of ministerial nominees to the National Assembly, and it featured the number of women. It has been reported that Tinubu's former 40-man list had only 9 women, a statistic that meant only 19.1% of nominees were women. Recent decision takes the ministerial nominees to 48, 9 women and 39 men. These figures means for every 1 female nominee, there are at least 4 male counterparts, while his earlier total meant women got 19.1%, the new total drops to 18.75%. And right now, we currently have 8 women on that list. And to discuss today, President Tinubu's 18.75% female ministers versus his campaign promises is Adaora Sydney Jack. She's the Executive Director, Gender Strategy Advancement International. You're welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
It's good to have you join us.
Thank you.
How you
It's
doing?
good to have you. I'm very well. Okay. You ladies look very beautiful.
You too. I like your dress.
Yes,
Thank you.
The lecturing for me, though.
Oh, it's the dress for me. You're welcome to the show.
Thank you
So,
so much.
I would like to ask of your opinion. We always ask everybody that comes on set, and we ask them what is their assessments of the recent president's administration since he came into power.
In terms of gender balance,
Yes.
abysmal. Absolutely abysmal. And I say this with all clarity in terms of the fact that he came on the toga of women mobilization. Essentially, Nigerian population is half by women, 49.5%. The women echoed in his campaigns, and they raised the bar during the elections for him. And in the promises that were made, he said 50%. We had the experience of having the vice president, coming for one of the conferences called the She Forum during the time of the campaign, and he mentioned 50%, for the women. And it's almost, I would call pathetic. I would say pathetic because then it seems as if people come on the toga of promises during campaign. They reel out all the lists. They make you feel like they can be heroes, and then at the end of the day, they're not even close to the villains themselves. So I think it is a far cry from what the president promised. I mean, 8 women out of 45 names. What more could have been done? And I understand that if you look at the ratings for Nigeria as the big brother, he's the chairman of ECOWAS. Imagine that you're the chairman of Economic West African State and your country has very few women in your cabinet, and then you are deliberately reducing and narrowing the gap for inclusion as the chair of ECOWAS, where that in the West African region, Nigeria takes the toga as one of the largest countries within that narrative. And, it speaks to the leadership, deliberate leadership intentions in terms of their political will to include women in offices, and not just in political offices. And I'm also talking about in business, in board membership, in councillorship at the lower level. And it's very emphatic to note that for a lot of African countries, leadership is a bottom-up approach, although we practice differently in Nigeria. Across Africa, in 19 countries, we have about 24% of women in 12,113 parliaments across Africa. And that is quite sad. And then it means that we have 24% in the lower house and about 20% in the upper chamber. The councilorships and the local government chairpersons are just, they call them the learning ropes for women when it comes to politics. But going back to your question, and again highlighting the reason why I say it's abysmal, is because we have a national gender policy as revised. How is the president coming into this race and as the leader of the #1 country in the West African region, in the continent as a whole as Africa, and not implementing. The former administration did not implement. The last administration by Goodluck Bello Jonathan tried a little bit at 31%. But then 25%, I beg your pardon. But what we see now is people say, oh, he did better than, President Buhari. But then come off it. He said he was going to do better. This is not doing better. Eight is a little less than number.
It was said that he did better than President Buhari. At least I'm looking at even the other context of Kenya, for instance. There seems to be an increasement from 2017 downwards, and Nigeria seems to take the toll too. At least there is actually an improvement. Does that mean that to some extent, with time, as time goes on, there will often be an improvement? It's not like it's totally bad.
It's a very the more you look, the less you see. That's the temperature I like to weigh the gender spaces. I mean, our gender is endangered. Absolutely, I can tell you that. And I say that critically because, when we look at the fact that, one, the 5 gender bills failed at the National Assembly, we did not have a deliberate legislature to pass the bills. It means that there is no political will to look at inclusion. One of those bills was to make extra seat, 111 extra seats for women at the National Assembly, starting from the State Assembly, to the House of Rep, to the Parliament. And it was turned down by the men, even though there was signatories before, they went into voting. And then you see a national gender policy as revised that has been there since 2006, revised last in 2022, and now we have it, and it is not yet implemented, even with the rankings of the president's ministerial list. Women did come out to advocate. There were lots of conversation around this. I was on your station on the sister program talking about the need for the president to review the list and to look at asking women to come into the room and sit on the table. And it's quite sad to say that I expect anything better, because the ministerial list is done and dusted. But where we are asking for the president to shove up the numbers based on capacity and not on chromosomes, is looking at the accessibility to access of women in power and positions at the MDAs and at the board level, at the civil service level. How many women are permanent secretaries? How many women are heading boards in the MDAs? How many women are also shoving up the numbers as vice chancellors in the universities? How many women do we have at the bar as chief justices of the Federation? These are some of the issues the president must look at. Data says, Barometer 2021, that Africa is yet to do itself, a service, because one, the people who are the burden bearers and also the beneficiaries of some of the critical policies that would empower that space are left out of the decision tables. They are left out of the policy making, position. So how can we prosper and take ourselves from the third world country if we do not look at half the population that are responsible for shaping the narrative of how we qualify as a democratic state?
Okay, but do you think at some point, because some people argue that women are not willing to put themselves out there in this space, do you think we women were ready and we're willing to put ourselves out there for this?
Okay, just before you answer that, to add to our question, you said initially that women seem to, perhaps during the past election, you saw a lot of women clamoring for the present president, and we often seem to have women do that. Often at times you see women, they are there, they are mobilizing for the president. They don't take themselves out, they don't push themselves out. It's not wrong if you see so many women coming out to aspire for president or some positions. Just like Chidinma said, do you think women are putting themselves out there?
Politics is a process, an election is an event. And I will explain that. For you to run for an office, you have to belong to a political party. You also have to show that you have political currency within the political party. Now, that is where the lobbying, that is where the mobilization should start for the women, not during the election. Now, you see a lot of women come out to buy forms just maybe 6 months to election and expect magic to happen. It's not a walk in the park. How have you contributed to the growth of the party? How have you been able to help and strategically engage in people at the lower level, especially at the community levels, to engage on the literacy of what your party stands for and what they stand to benefit if they vote for you within that party ranking? How are you able to speak about inclusion beyond party woman leader, beyond mobilizer, beyond the clapping and the dancing? How do women take their currency and their numbers to multiply the interest of other women within the political space? And I think that's what the question should ask, because remember, women can only run if they pass through the primary stage. So at the primary stage, how are they engaging at the political level? And again, you come back to the issue of the patriarchal system within the political party. You can only disrupt that if we have women who also understand that conversations with the men on the table is also key to be able to disrupt the system. We walk into the political parties expecting tokenism, expecting cheaper party forms, expecting 50% in the cost. And they look at it as tokenism. And then they say, okay, the highest bidder takes it all. And then you're surprised when a male takes the ticket and runs with it for the party because he has more money. Now, the women should be able to understand that it is not business as usual and politics is tough. And if you're going to get into that space, you must be willing to run as hard as the men and position yourself as frontliners as much as the men. It is not a question of, oh, I am a woman, give me ticket. Oh, I am a woman, give me less forms. Oh, I'm a woman, I should be considered because we are very few in this space. It should be, oh, I am a woman, I am capable. Oh, I am a woman, I deserve as much opportunity because I equal in strength and in intelligence. And that should be the narrative of women. And I think until we decide that our politics will continue to go 360 around the issue of chromosomes, or he's woman, he's male, or he's fine, it's not usually the ideology of finance that thrives in politics. It's the ability of what you can with your political currency as a person. And I don't even want to use the word male or female, because it's first about human right in our space before it's women's right. But the men, whether you like it or not, have played the game so well and have advanced their cause so well and shaped the narrative to redefine the space to become masculine, so that the conversation, when women begin to talk about women in the positioning, women in the space, it is termed feminism. However, feminism just means women positioning themselves for the idea of women to thrive. You have men who are feminists, you have men who speak for women. And I think, that misconstruction of the definition of feminism also creates negative gender identity and stereotype around the conversation of women's rights, because then you see men say, you're a feminist, you come and take our space, we don't want women in this space, they'll take all the space.
Angry feminists.
Exactly. And so the terminology seems to now be a word used to belittle and seemingly defeatist. And I think that's why we need to change the narrative. How do we redefine gender identities in political space? How do we non-sexualize the role of women in the political space? You are coming on a show, for instance, somebody asked me on another station, how do women multitask? How do women, complement being mothers and running elections? And I say, how do women complement being fathers? It starts from the sexism in the media. We need to de-stereotype the language. We need to de-stereotype the conversation, because if you ask a woman how does she multitask, it's almost as if you're saying being a woman, is limiting. So we need to reorganize our conversations to look at women first as equal partners in development and look at their capacities as enablers, not as belittlers. And I think that's where we start. Okay,
the 35% affirmative action we're talking about, how do you think, when this is implemented properly, how do you think it's going to change the public or general perceptive of gender equality and then women in leadership positions?
You see, the quota system all over the world has been the language, the journey to open up the space, and more so in Africa. You look at countries like Rwanda, you look at countries like Namibia, you look at countries like South Africa, you look at countries like Zambia, you look at countries like Ghana. Now, Rwanda had to go through a genocide to define how important it is to close the gap between the population of the men and the women, both in parliament and in leadership. And so at the world best, in Africa. They are the highest ranking parliament, you know, in terms of membership and numbers at 68%. Now, it's a question of how willing is Nigeria willing to look at the quota system as an entry point. Remember, the quota system, the 35% affirmative action, was one of the 5 gender bills that was thrown out. And Nigerian women marched in their numbers, waited in front of the National Assembly, besieged the parliamentarians, even led with the first ladies, and then in combo with the first lady and the vice president's wife, you know, Dolapo Sibajo. And they turned down the bill right in front of the women and the executive women who were there in the parliament. So it was very obvious that it wasn't a question of 35% affirmative action, it was a question of political will. Because the 35% affirmative action is to look at how we can open up the space. In fact, the action and its affirmation was curated into the extra shift bill, which said that we would have an extra 111 seats for women. And what that meant was that we will try it for four election circles, which is about 16 years. When we look at the numbers and see that the numbers have shoved up both at the state level and at the federal level, we can reconsider and take a pushback and say, okay, fine, we're fine with what we have. Let's go through the rankings. It wasn't going to be a permanent solution. It was going to be a first step to open up the space. So the 35% affirmative action is linguistical. Is semantics, as far as I'm concerned, if it is not practicable. How do we practice and bring it into bear in the system? It is by looking at how many women are permanent secretaries, how many women are councillors, how many women are vice chairmen, how many women are twinning in states. I mean, we used to have more women numbers as deputy governors in Nigeria. Now we have just about 6, So the question is, how are we politicizing the issue of gender mainstreaming within the conversation of the 35% affirmative action? How are we also adopting a community-based advocacy to look at conversations in our social spaces to reinvent socialization for women at the community to think that they can also be leaders? It starts from the church, it starts from the imam, it starts from the market, it starts from the umuadas, it starts from the yaolojas, it starts at the community level. And then finally, it begins from the home. It begins from our curriculum. When you raise a boy child and you raise a girl child, what is the language of parenting that you breathe in your space? How do we teach girls in school and also teach boys that they are human beings and not opposite sexes? So you look at the curriculum and the book says Obi plays ball, Ada is cooking. So from the onset in the book and in the curriculum, Ada is thinking, I'm fit for the kitchen. Nobody is saying, no, Ada is a governor or Chidinma is a scientist. Nobody is reinventing the conversation and the curriculum. So maybe we need to take a step back to look at socialization from our curriculum, from our homes, from our schools, from our marketplaces, from our churches, from the mosque, and more so from our entertainment and our social sectors, from our music. How do we non-sexualize females in music videos? So it's a very conscripted conspiracy. And until the media is deliberate, it also starts from the media houses. How many of our stories are inclusive? Do we have a separate gender desk that looks at issues of inclusion? Or do we have a cerebral way of including female stories just as a touch to the story? It must be deliberate. And remember, in the calculation of the discussion, we also have women living with disabilities. We have the cadre of the vulnerables. So how do we also look at that? So like I said, it's a complex conversation. But then, if we have political will, I can guarantee you that the president has the mandate to wake up and say, you know what, enough is enough. I want that 35% affirmative action passed. I would want to see an executive bill to look at shoving up the numbers and, seeing the board membership with a certain quota. I would like to say that the national, gender policy as revised is implemented starting from the MDAs. The president can do that. But is he going to be able to do it and make sure that his boys' brigade, those in the parliament, the governors, are able to toe the toga? That's another question. If your president does not have the political will, If the administration has no political will, then the system will not have the political will.
Okay, I know you've said a whole lot of things, and if we allow you, you're going to say everything at this stage. But at the same time, speaking about women being in that political space, or not just the political, social, and the rest, board, what have you, how do we now ensure that the part of gender roles, because I know gender roles are very important, are not neglected? For instance, I was reading a book yesterday, and they said something about women being identified as not as based on their achievements, but the roles they play as wives, as mothers in the home and the rest. But gender roles are important. I know you agree.
Well, when you say gender roles, also men's roles are important. So again, it comes to ideology, it comes to narrative, it comes to gender identities. It is now left for you and I to redefine how we introduce the conversations for that nomenclature to change. Once we hear gender roles, the first thing that comes to your mind is female. Why should it be female? Why can't it be both male and female? And that's the way that we can only achieve bridging the gender gap by 2030, which is absolutely not possible. But I'm saying that if we must recognize the gender roles, we must make it about equity in the spaces of both gender, because you do not want to educate and eulogize the ideology of gender roles within the conscription that is only for female, because your boy child will grow up thinking like that. And so you have a recycled behavioral trend that makes even the boys who grow into men to think that those roles are just feminine. And so that's why it's good to look at gender identities from both sides. Yes, it is good to say that women give birth, which is absolutely natural. Women get married, women build homes. Some do not want to get married. Some stay single. Some are single parents. So the world is changing. How are we redefining our identities to be able to accommodate the complexity that the world presents? Because what will happen is that if we condition our mind to traditional sects that are not progressive in nature, we will not only have girls go to school, come out and get married and not use their capacity, we will then see a slower trend of girls willing to go to school, because they will say at the end of the day, I'm just going to be a wife, there's no point. And so you see less numbers of girls going to school, you see less numbers of girls taking up leadership roles, because they are taught to think, oh, gender role first before capacity. So you must open up the space by rethinking the gender identities and changing the narrative. And I think that's where we'll start. And like I said, it's ought to start from the home. That is where the mindset of conscription for gender roles begin. It starts from the mom or the dad. It starts from the parent, it starts from the grandma. Whoever is raising the child within that space needs to rethink how they introduce gender roles, so that it is not about, oh, you are female, I am male. This is what you can do only, and this is what you can do only. And remember, now you also have a larger conversation in the wider world, where sexualities are becoming dynamic, and you need to make sure that your children are aware as they go into the larger space, because you're not going to be with them all the time. Socialization has a way of reforming. It's either you decide that it reforms for good or reforms for bad. So that is where you need to have both training on not just gender identification on both male and female, but as human beings.
Okay, I think I wanted to talk about the role of godfatherism, but I think we'll have to go on a break. When we come back, we'll discuss that. Okay, viewers, we'll be going on a short break, and when we return, Engendered continues. We will be right back.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, it's still Engendered, and we've been discussing a very vital topic based on what is trending, which is President Tinubu 18.75% female ministers versus campaign promises. We've been doing this with Adaora Senior, and just before we went on that break, Chidinma was going to ask I guess.
Yes,
Godfatherism.
yeah, we're going to talk about godfatherism. And I was having a conversation with somebody, and we were talking about the fact that godfatherism plays a vital role in getting people nominated in some positions. And let me read what the person had to say to me. He said, we need to look at the strategic position of women. Politicians at the time are campaigning, and they're looking at people around them who have contributed to their successes. It depends on who your godfather is. If you don't have a godfather, forget it. So now, how do we react to this? Could that be part of the reason maybe some women are not in some particular offices or some positions?
I think, godfatherism is a cultural mindset of how to position power broking within institutions, and not just in politics. Is in the media, is in journalism, is in medicine, is everywhere. But when it comes to politics, it's a little more dynamic, because then it's a game of interests, not just about who you want to support. There have been issues and conditions where you would have certain people who were the favorite of the godfather, but the currency of his popularity limits him to be the particular candidate in an election. So you may have a candidate who is extremely loved, but very unpopular. And so even those who rig elections, quote unquote, will find it very difficult to rig such a person in. And that's why, again, looking at the formation and the interest and the administrative, participation of political party is very important. You don't just become, you don't just emerge. Even when you do emerge, there must be somewhere, there must be a backgrounding. Who are you? What have you done? Where are you coming from? What do you have to offer? Even if what you're offering is empty, there must be a canon, a shape-shifting procedure where you can be put into and then you can be remodeled. So it is not a case of just appearing and becoming. And let me tell you, godfathers are also very, very intuitive. They know that their currency and their interest and their network is as big as their structure. So if you are going to choose somebody that the structure does not like and cannot adopt, you are running a lone journey. Because at the end of the day, when there is a demise where the person runs into problem, it will be just left for you to solve alone. And there is no political calculation whether the structure is, E structure or, currency structure or there is a structure of some sort. And I can tell you this, that unless women are able to say, this is what I want to do. For instance, you're great at your job and you know that advocacy is something you love and you want to be able to be a face or a voice for women or girls out of school. It's a sect. It's a positioning. And then when there is a position or a conversation around issues surrounding girls out of school, even within a political campaign, you can volunteer to speak. That is how you start to make your currency work for your network, even when you don't have it. And I give you a clear example. I ran elections in 2019 for State House of Assembly for Kigwe constituency. And when I ran under a very unknown, unpopular party. Popular in the Southeast, but not popular nationally. Action Alliance. And I was the only candidate at that time and the only female. And so what did I do? I said, oh, you know what? Our party is beginning to have routings in the state. Perhaps we need a bigger public relations engagement to be able to promote the party, expand the party ideals. And again, I knew what I wanted from a political party. So I studied the vision, mission, and the manifesto of my political party and had it at heart. And one of the key pointers for me was that it was encouraging 50% of inclusion in their political trajectory. And for me, that was what I was looking for in a political party. What are the women looking for? Are they looking for special purpose vehicles to just run for elections? Or are they looking to commit to a process? Because like I said earlier, politics is a process, election is an event. So how do you move with the process to get to the point where the event is on its own launching itself? And that's how it happened when I ran under Action Alliance. By the time we became popular, we were now the party to beat, because at the time, the candidate who was not able to get a special purpose vehicle in the state, who was then the son-in-law of the former governor of Imo State, Rochas Okorocha, now joined Action Alliance, and we now became the party to beat. So it was now a race between Action Alliance and the PDP. And then we had all the state assembly members defect to Action Alliance and now became Action Alliance members. So sitting state assembly members were now AA members because of the mass movement of their members from the APC at that time to AA to support their candidate who was now running with the AA toga. And that's how we were able to create intention. We were able to build our capacity. And I can tell you it was a very fierce, election that was highly competitive. And because of the AA ability to be able to compete within that space, even though then I wouldn't say that I lost or ran, because to dare to run is even to win for a woman. I was at the ballot, and because I didn't emerge, I was then considered, regardless, by the then governor, who became the winner of the election from the People's Democratic Party, and said, oh wow, I like the way you run, I like your capacity, and I like that you also come from a space which is very needed from the media. And that's how I became the senior special assistant on information in the then Emeka Ihedioha's government. And that was how I was able to build political structure, use and mobilize the numbers I built within the election. And even though I didn't run, till today, when elections are held, they are calling, who do we vote for? Where do we vote? How do we mobilize? What do you think? So you begin to instruct leadership even when you are not in a race. And that's why politics is a process. If you don't mobilize your capacity to become prominent enough to teach itself, sell itself, the network begins to diminish, because for you it's just an event. It's not about the process. So women should begin to look at the fact that even though there is a need for Godfatherism, what do you yourself say that you can bring to the table? And that's where Godfatherism even begins to talk. But again, you have seen this election, 2023 election was very dynamic. It opened a lot of vistas to even the idea of independent candidacy, because a lot of people ran and didn't need godfathers. A lot of people came out with new ventures. There were novel ideas. Social media took the toga. So godfathers are also leaning back and looking and saying, this is a new normal. How do we penetrate the space? These netizens are awakened, and they are taking over the political space. They are shaping ideologies. So you must be able to be bankable. If you don't have a capacity that is bankable, and people think that you are not popular enough to present the ideas and take leadership by the hand, even the godfathers will withdraw. So it is time for us to demystify the idea of Godfatherism and Godmotherism, even though I think it does not exist. But I seem to think that people should begin to look at, first of all, their self-currency and begin to think what they can bring to the table, because the moment you say, oh, I need a godfather, before you've even started the race, it is very defeatist. And so it means that even if you have capacity, you need validation. But without the currency of your capacity, your validation is null and void. Because by the time it shows that you have nothing to offer and everybody seems to be dragging you along, when they put you there, you are not going to serve the will of the people. You are going to be a vacuum for political intrigues. And that's it. Okay, so one of the issues that women would normally have in the society when aspiring for political offices or positions is the fact of potency and performance. Is she going to deliver? Does she have what it takes? You've said that politics is a game and a game of interest. Can she meet the interest of other people? Is she able to go out of the normal, the way it's played? So do you think women, if given the chance, perhaps the 35 affirmative action comes into implementation one day, do you think women are somewhat able to deliver? In the voice and in the words of Joyce Banda, former president of Malawi, no one would give you the chance, you take it. And you can only take it by being present. And the presence also means planning, positioning, preparation, so that when the opportunity calls, you are well fitted for that role. It's not a game of cards or a plate of sushi that you're dishing around and say, oh, you please, would you like some? Do you like it? Do you eat white meat? Do you eat raw meat? Do you eat medium to rare? No one's going to ask you that. And that's why when women make comments like, oh, why must this meeting be in the night? Why are the men always holding meetings in the night? Politics is too nocturnal. My husband will not allow me. My children. You must be prepared. Because it is deliberate to extrude you out of the system. It is created so that you are angry and unfit and unwell and unready and unprepared to come into that space, because the decisions they will make in the evening and night are done. When you come in the morning to join, you are having a tea party. So women should understand that politics is a game of interest. And again, I repeat that it is very local. And local is not just about the village or the rural level or the community. It's about the sub-networking. The conversations that are had, you know, at the odd hours. You know, the most sophisticated ideas are instantaneous. And when they come, you know, they are looking for like minds to be able to deliberate. And at that moment, key positionings and decisions are made. If you're not on that table when those decisions are made, and you're talking, oh, properness, and when they are prepared, when you're prepared, you do your makeup, you know, you look good, you make sure that you have your tea, and your driver drops you off at the right time, and you come in and they welcome you. So, oh, Chidinma, you're welcome to the meeting. Oh, you look so good. That's how you will leave that meeting, looking so good without having any idea what has been discussed that night. So I say again, you have to be prepared, you have to present yourself, and you have to be able to understand that no one is going to call you and say, take this. Because your preparation makes you available to be able to present yourself, to take it. And when you take it, the question of capacity does not arise because you're prepared. That is what happens in politics. And it's getting a little more feisty because we are seeing the slimming spaces for women. We have less women in parliament. We have less women at the local level. So how do we shove up the numbers? It's by women telling themselves and saying, look, women, you know, yes, we are asking for a quota system, but how many of us are willing to sit down and deliberate and say, look, we have 15 capacity-driven women. We have women who have high intellect. Let's push them forward. Let's have a harmonization and see that this 15 best of us go for the rest of us. The moment you decide to unify your interest, that shows preparation. But when the women continue to speak from divergent corners and divergent views, everybody wants to run, nobody wants to convert. The men are planning, they are picking their best for, and you find out that you thought that Emeka was against Obi, and then next thing he's the one running for Obi and stepping down, and you're wondering what's going on. That's because the men have an idea that one, convergence is about unification of interest. That's where the godfatherism comes in. That's where the lobbying takes shape. So women should begin to understand that we need to look at what works within our cultural sect, what works in our tradition, what works, and how do we use that personal understanding to get into the space. You cannot change the system from the outside, Chidinma. Victoria, you cannot do magic when you are on the outside. You can advocate for all you want. You can hold all the conferences. You can hold all the summits. You can do all the protests. But as long as you're not in the system, as long as you don't understand the qualities that you can bring to the table within the power-broking cabal, you cannot fix it. So women should first think of how do we get in, demystify these bridges and get into the system and begin to break down the walls of barriers of political hindrances for women. And I think if you look at South Africa, the ANC, you look at Rwanda, the BTP, you look at UK, the Conservatives, you look at the Republicans, that is the ideology that has sold for decades. The system cannot fix itself from the outside. We must understand how we open the door, take a sneak peek, take a leg in, and then push the door down and begin to change the narrative from the inside.
Okay, now let's look at the aspect of accountability. We know that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu promised us 50%, and now it's not coming out soon. Some people have the mentality of half bread is better than none. We still have 8 women there, right? At least you
is that half bread or no bread?
Just a crumb. Like a crumb. But some people have the mentality like at least we have 8 there, and rather than having none. So now, how do we hold our leaders accountable? What does that mean that we can use to hold them? Okay, this is the promise you made to us, and we're not getting it. Do we have that demand system that we can come out and say, we want this, and you're not giving us this?
Well, it depends on active citizenship, especially if you have a member of House of Assembly. I don't know how much, progress has been done with recalling back members through signatories and all that, because people have tried it severally and we saw how it was, it ended up in deadlock. We don't really get to that stage. But then in terms of holding leadership accountability, it comes with consistent advocacy. it comes with continuous engagement. And the person sometimes may not be acting in isolation. Remember that, like I said, it takes a process to do politics, and the event, the election, has already been planned like 2 years ago or 6 months ago. So the election is to fulfill all righteousness. I mean, Nigerian election. So if you have that understanding, in order to hold accountability and continue the torchlight and bear the torch, you must continue. It's like the conversation we're having now. It's like telling Mr. President, this is what you promised, but this is what you gave. We're not reneging and telling you that you will do better and that you must do better. And there are ways you can do better. This is where the women bring in the suggestions. This is where the resolutions are brought to bear. This is where you can say, oh, you told us that you will have more women in so positions and you didn't have it. This is what we want and this is what we demand. If the idea of 35% affirmative action will help fix it through quota, the president must understand that Nigerian women will not renege. Some people will not go as a group on their own to the villa and have lunch with Mr. President, and then they will judge her, and then when a few of them get appointments, then the whole advocacy for them is over and a new momentum starts to rise. It should be a question of all of, not without any of us, but all of us. It should be a question of all of us for all of us. It should be a question of, I hold your hand, you hold my hand, I get into the room and I'm hoping that Ma is coming right behind. It is not a question of going into the room and shutting the door, which is oftentimes a question of, mentorship that arises between younger women and women who have actually been politicians in the past. The question is, the women who went there, what did they do for other women? How did they hold the torch? How did they become torch bearers for younger women? How did they develop the younger women who had great capacity to be able to come into the room and create leadership succession? What you have is that they get in there, and because, the argument is because of the strain of having to try to survive in a highly masculine environment, they lose the control to refocus what's important, and that's in building the next generation of female leaders. And so you're busy trying to hold on to a position, you're busy trying to get re-elected, you're forgetting that in order to build legacy, you have to also get all the younger people, all the women into the room. And I think that is where the narrative should start to come from. And that's when men say, oh, women don't like each other, that's what they mean. Because you can see that most men would hold a litany of men behind them, even if they are not going to be in the same position, they are all working together. That structure is not reclining. So women should look at that and should know that it is not a competition, it is collaboration. You are not there to outdo each other, you are there to do it with each other. And I think that's the language women should adopt.
Okay, so watching the parliament session that happened, I think in Kenya, where the lady there, Gloria, she came out and wanted to file in a motion about how ladies are tend to be stigmatized during periods and the rest because they can't even go to school. If you watch that session, you notice that it was even a woman that came in for her, like that shushed her down, that you can't be doing this. So that issue of an alliance, women forming convergence, do you think it can ever happen? Because it seems to be like a competition. When you see a woman out there, it's another fellow woman that will tell even the male gender and the woman that what is she doing there? Is she not supposed to be at home fending for her children, taking care of her husband? So do you think that this alliance, this issue of women being the problem of themselves will ever come to an end?
Well, like I always say, life is progressive. And again, the definition of women against each other is relative. And I like to take the narrative from the negative. One is because, there is this conscription of masculine mindset of competition for women than collaboration. And it's like, for instance, most girls, and I mean, argue with me if you think I'm wrong, will dress up trying to touch their hair, make sure that they look good, not necessarily to look good for a man, but to look good for other girls. Make sure that, oh, my hair is nice, and then you pass, oh, yeah, no, thank you, I just had my hair there, thank you. So it's a natural phenomenon. But how do you re-engineer that? And that's what the scenario in Kenya presented, alliances. How do you talk collaboration without sounding entitled? You know, women are running elections, they say, support me, you must support me, or you must vote me, I'm a woman. No, I don't have to. I need to know what you're bringing to the table. I need to know what you can do. I need to know why I must put my money on you to be able to support you either through campaign financing. It is not an entitlement. And women must begin to redefine how their approach is done. They need to communicate capacity. They need to communicate willingness to collaborate. They need to communicate a willingness to unlearn certain habits. You see a lot of women groups. You can see the bitterness, the anger, you could just you can sense it on several women groups by women, and you are wondering, how is this going to function if there's so much toxicity in one space? The first thing is, women should come out to say, you know what, there are issues we're dealing with, we are still broken, there are areas we need to get help, and start to unbundle. And when we begin to unbundle, then, especially women who have run elections, I can tell you that when somebody comes to meet me and say, oh, you're going to run an election again, I'm like, oh, well, just hold it there. You know, there is a sense of, you know, affinity. There's a lacking affinity to want to contest. Not because you don't have capacity, but because the experience, whether you like it or not, can leave a little bit of backlog of trauma if you don't unburden. If you don't have a safe space to unlearn certain habits, to, you know, leave back certain bitterness. And I can tell you that's the space women do not have. Women must learn to cultivate safe spaces where even those who have run before, you can see that's why the numbers are smaller, because those who have tried it don't want to go back, and those who did not get it don't want to struggle anymore. So we must look at safe spaces for women to be able to unlearn, unbundle, and exceptional socialization comes from, you know, when women are able to get help psychologically from those positions. And I say a lot about this in my forthcoming book, because I'm working on the book, and one of the things I say, it's politics against politricks, and it's a matter of mind. And until we begin to demystify that, women will continue to masculinize their expressions on other women rather than the men. So rather than see the men as competition, you see each other as competition, and so you prefer to align, you prefer to vote a man rather than understanding that your alliance with a fellow woman would increase the chances of either you or her on the decision table. And so that's where we need to begin to look at it. And I do not know, I mean, it's like saying, will competition ever end in the world? It's how you look at it, it's how healthy it is. Does it open up the spaces for progression? Does it uplift? Does it showcase? Does it present? Those are the things that you ought to look at. And if women don't look at it that way when it comes to politics, they may continue to look at vying for offices but not providing service.
Okay, I would like to know your reaction to this. Not really important, but I would like to know, to the removal of Miriam Shetty from the ministerial list. What will be your reaction to that?
Well, they replaced her with another woman. However, it also shows, is the president in charge? Is he the one going through his list? Was there background in done when Mr. President is even aware of the Chetty in the first place? Who put that name in the list and who took it out? The question is, it makes the president looks like he has weak supervision attributes. It makes it look like he is not in the room when these decisions are made, and it makes him look like his orders are taken for granted. And that's what Mr. President must make Nigerians understand that he's not willing to take. He is going to be an active participant in the decisions that happen, whether in his cabinet or in administrative policies. He must be present. What they could have done was allow the list to go through. If they decide to change the name, it could have happened through the parliament, where they decide not to confirm the person for certain reasons best known to them. But you cannot, because again, you're looking at the fact that there's a psychology of rejection in that play. There is a psychology of, you know, unawareness. There's a psychology of confusion and lack of clarity in that simple action. So it is not even about Shetty. It's about the actors. and not her as a victim. And I think that's where people should redirect the conversation.
All right, thank you so much for this session. I think the highlight for me, take home for me, is this: we cannot change the system outside the system. We should try and be part of the system before we can be able to take decisions that will change the system. That was all we can take on today's episode of Engendered. Do well to join us next time for an interesting episode. I remain Chidinma Ufomadu.
And I am Victoria Agbi. Until next time, have a splendid evening.
Bye.
Thank you.